Hey, guess what? I have been hearing a lot about lately something called Linux.
Oh, Linux. Now you're talking. It's like hidden superhero of the tech world.
Absolutely. I have heard it's a big deal, but I have no idea. Can you enlighten me?
Okay, now you're ready to dive into a new operating system. By end of this, you'll realize how you ever live without it.
So, you mentioned Linux is an operating system.
That's what people usually say, but it's not entirely accurate.
Wait, what do you mean?
To really get what Linux is all about, you need to know a bit about two key people, Linus Torvalds
NVIDIA, fuck you.
and Richard Stallman.
This has the name Bill Gates on it. The ritual is to give him the finger. So, want to join in?
They are pretty much the heart and soul behind what makes Linux what it is today. You know, they are also a great example of how you don't always need to agree on everything to work towards something big. As long as you are aiming for the same goal, different perspective can still lead you to the same destination.
Oh, that makes sense.
Exactly. Linus Torvalds is like the researcher who believes in sharing knowledge to help it grow. He sees that as the real purpose of education. On the other hand, Richard Stallman is more about the philosophy of the Free Software Foundation, where free isn't about cost, but about freedom. They have different perspective, but both have essential to what make Linux stand for.
So, what is their role in development of Linux?
When we talk about Linux, it's more accurate to call it GNU plus Linux. The Linux kernel created by Linus Torvalds is the core of the system, but it's the program from the GNU Project founded by Richard Stallman that provide the essential tools that makes the operating system functional, from booting up to running application. So it's important to recognize both parts and call it GNU plus Linux.
So, Linux can't run without GNU programs.
Not exactly. While GNU programs are commonly used with Linux, the Linux kernel itself can run with other essential tools and libraries. For instance, systems like Alpine Linux and Android use different core libraries and utilities instead of GNUs. They show that Linux can operate with alternative software, though GNU tools are popular choice.
Tell me more.
Sure, Linux is actually just the kernel, which is the core part of the operating system. To really understand what a kernel does, it helps to have basic idea of how an operating system works in general. The kernel is responsible for managing hardware, system resources and communication between software and hardware. So if you get a handle on overall function of an operating system, it will make understanding the kernel a lot easier.
So, the kernel includes several key components.
Yeah, which includes I/O handlers, schedulers, memory manager and driver programs. When we talk about the kernel, think of it like a car engine. Sure, the engine is crucial, but it's pretty useless on its own. The car and the engine are totally dependent on each other to get anywhere. So while the Linux kernel is the key part of the operating system, it's only one piece of the puzzle. Without it, the whole system would be like a car without engine, just sitting there, not going anywhere.
So, can you tell me more about its early development?
So Linus Torvalds didn't just stop at creating the Linux kernel. Oh no, he also gave us Git. That's right, the guy who made your computer run smoothly also made version control less of a nightmare. But we'll save the saga of Git for another day. As for Linux, it popped into existence in 1991. As its name has a bit of quirky backstory, it was originally meant to be freaks, but his friend named the directory Linux on his FTP server, where X stands for Unix-like.
And what about GNU?
Good question. GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix, which is a bit of cheeky acronym. It's a project started by Richard Stallman in 1983 with the goal of creating a completely free and open source Unix-like operating system. GNU was all about providing software freedom, meaning users could freely use, modify and distribute the software. By the time the Linux kernel came along, GNU had already developed many essential components for the complete operating system. Combining GNU tools with the Linux kernel gave us the powerful and flexible GNU plus Linux system we know today.
Wait, can we edit this operating system?
Well, that's like asking if you can modify your car. Sure you can, but it's not as simple as changing a photo or tweaking a document. Editing an operating system involves a lot more complexity. You might update software, tweak specific programs, or even change a wallpaper. And that's like making adjustment to your car. From a user's perspective, yes, you can. But from a programmer's standpoint, modifying an operating system can be pretty much intricate and involve a lot of overhead. It's not exactly something you'd want to dive into without having some serious commitment.
So, how can I install Linux?
You can install Linux by using something called a distro or distribution. A Linux distro is essentially a version of Linux that comes packaged with the Linux kernel and variety of software and tools. There are many different distros to choose from, each tailored for different needs and preferences.
So, Linux comes in form of distributions.
Exactly. A distribution or distro is essentially a version of GNU plus Linux that has been customized and put together by open source contributors from around the world. Think of it like cars. They all have engines, but different manufacturers created their own version of the unique features and designs. Similarly, each Linux distro uses the same core Linux kernel but adds different software, tools, and features, making each one unique in its own way.
So, can I just download the distro and install it on my Windows 11?
Oh, not quite. Linux is not an application, it's whole operating system. Installing Linux inside Windows is like saying driving a car inside a car, which sounds impossible, but you can install Linux on separate disk or partition, so it can boot up on its own. Or alternatively, you can run Linux inside a virtual machine, which is like installing a virtual car and driving it inside phone while sitting inside your car.
Can you tell me what these distros are?
Imagine Linux distros as wacky party with all sort of unique characters. First, there is Debian, the dependable, no-nonsense guest who always shows up on the time and keeps things running smoothly. Then there is Ubuntu, the party animal who brings all the cool gadgets and snacks. It's fantastic, but sometimes a bit too much. Like that friend who insists on playing the DJ all night. Kali Linux is the undercover agent at the party, always on the lookout for security holes and testing everyone's password. Kubuntu is Ubuntu's sophisticated cousin, dressed to impress with the KDE desktop environment. Think of it as a tuxedo wearing guest who knows all the best dance moves. Lubuntu is chill, minimalist type who shows up with just essential and doesn't make a fuss. Perfect for when you are running an old hardware. Mint is friendly, down-to-earth guest who is based on Ubuntu but adds bit of extra polish to make everyone feel at home. And then there is Arch, the DIE enthusiast who shows up with their own toolbox, ready to build and tweak things just they like them. It's a bit of challenge but also rewarding if you are into customization. And honestly, there are so many more out there. It's like an endless carnival of quirky fun characters.
So, is this why people are so enthusiastic about Linux? Because it's open source.
Exactly. The beauty of open source is that you can tweak and customize Linux in pretty much any way you want. It's like having a super customizable car. You can change the engine, swap out the tires, or even give it a new paint job. In Linux case, you could even swap out the Linux kernel itself with a different variant created by someone else. It's all about having the freedom to shape your system exactly how you like it. The possibilities are endless, and that's what makes Linux so exciting.
That sounds amazing.
Pretty much. It's the tech version of being a superhero, where your superpower is the ability to shape and control your operating system and hardware however you want. Just remember what Uncle Ben said, with great powers comes great responsibility. So while you are out there creating your dream system, don't forget to keep backups and maybe avoid turning your hardware into a spaceship, unless you are ready to lift off.
Got it. I'll stick to flying my tech responsibly.
Perfect. So let's meet up next time with something more about Linux.